Hello everyone, welcome to another video from Fantasy Football Scout. My name is Az, and yes, you might notice a few things are different. Firstly, all new graphics. So YouTube has been completely redesigned ahead of the new season. I've been working really hard behind the scenes to kind of get this all working. So obviously we've got the music, the starting soon, the kind of new intro video, and then a new introduction screen, new presenter screens, backgrounds, colours, all that kind of stuff. Gone for like a kind of, trying to get a kind of a really clean, fresh look. Hopefully you like it. If you've got any comments about it at all, do drop them in the comments and I'll read them and feedback to our designer as well. If there's things you like, if there's things you don't like, if there's things you wish we had, but you're the guys that watch this stuff, so obviously I want to make it as good as possible for you lot. So yeah, let me know what you think. You also noticed that of course Reece James is now up on the wall. Again, different format of him to the others. He's been hand drawn, which is very nice, as opposed to kind of digitally rendered like the others. So that's going to be the format for the next three of those who go on the wall. Who's going to be next season? Could it be one of the players we're going to be talking about today? Maybe. We're going to be talking today about probably the most requested video that I've had so far this pre-season. We've got this kind of amazing batch of 8 million midfielders to talk about, which we haven't really had kind of like for the last few seasons. This is all a bit new. So there's about sort of 6 of those that we're going to be mentioning as well. There's kind of others in the kind of the 8.5 bracket. Someone like Bowen, for example, who doesn't quite make the cut. Obviously, there's some good 7.5 options. People are looking at like someone like Sancho. We're going to be pretty focusing on the ones that are 8 million and whether you need to kind of use a spot in your team to kind of make sure you've got the structure to be able to move between them, which I think is growing more and more important as we go. And if it means if you're fighting at the back or something like that, you might find it a bit harder to move one of these guys if and when they do explode, because there's such good options. One of them is bound to do well next season. So let's start with the first player on the list, which is James Maddison. For the first 3, what I've done is I've looked at them last season and compared that to the season before, because they've all kind of had their kind of breakout seasons, these 3 players. So James Maddison, he had his injuries, had his hip injuries again last season, but he still got 28 starts out of 38. Really difficult season for Leicester. Obviously, navigating Europe, navigating all the injuries they had, really poor performances from all their defenders, from the likes of Iheanacho, who thought might break in. Vardy did well for a bit, but then got injured. It was really stop and start. Even someone like Barnes sort of in and out of the team. The one real consistent all season was the form of James Maddison. I mean, for him to get 181 points last season, he was 133 the season before that. He managed 12 goals, 8 assists, so 20 goal involvements for James Maddison in such a difficult season. He was taking the set pieces. He really kind of did end up as that kind of main, talisman figure for Maddison, which I've always hoped he could hit. I've always had my doubts about whether he would reach that, but I've always widely loved him as a player. I think he's absolutely fantastic, and I think last season really was his kind of FPL breakout year. So his XG over the season 8.78. So he massively overperformed on that. 12 goals from expected goals of 9, so 3 more goals than he perhaps should have done. Expected assists just 4, so again they were converted more, so nearly double. 8 assists compared to 4. An XGI of 12.72. So we're looking at kind of in 8 more goal involvements, 7 more goal involvements than perhaps he should have done. And these stats are getting better and better. It seems at kind of predicting these, and we'll see there's a lot of them that are really close to their mark. But Maddison is definitely someone that overperformed. In terms of his XGI per 90, 0.46. It's okay. It's not incredible. We're going to be talking about some other players who perhaps did better than that. The worrying thing here is the kind of is there a bit of regression to become, because when you might have a player like Son who can sort of consistently overperform on these metrics, but for a lot of other players these stats do tend to catch up with you. I mean, the good thing is, this happened in a really turbulent season for Leicester. Maddison having such a strong season, really stepping up to the plate and sort of carrying them forward to a lot of victories, particularly in the latter end of the season, when he was absolutely superb, when they had the full strength team out and they were, beating Watford by 4 or 5 goals and just genuinely playing really well. So there's a lot of encouragement that Leicester can improve in terms that could carry Maddison to the next level. The underlying data suggests there's a bit of regression coming, but the general form is pretty good. When you compare that to his season last year, 24 starts, 133 points, that's a bang average, really. I mean, he was about 7 million last season, 133 points. That's not that great value. 8 goals, 7 assists, not bad. 15 goal involvements. Again, 3.81 on his XG, so massively overperformed that. 3.4 on his assists. outperformed that again. Had an XGI of 7.2. So again, overperformed. Are we seeing a James Maddison that is capable of consistently overperforming on those stats, or are we going to see someone who does manage to regress back to the mean? Difficult to say. My hope is that he can really kick on. I mean, his XGI per 90 is up from last season, from the season before, 0.3 up to 0.46. Really hoping that he can carry on. We're going to be talking a bit about Leicester's fixtures to start. He might not be such a factor for us at the beginning of the season, but we'll soon know whether he's going to be a real factor for us going forward. Bit of a wait and see for me, and I'm his biggest fan. So if I'm saying that, then it probably is wise to wait and see. So next up, we have Bukayo Saka, again, a player who had an absolutely astounding season last year, both for Arsenal, although they just missed out on the top four. But personally, really kicked up and became this kind of elite FPL option for us. 36 starts, only missed two games. FPL points 179, so nearly getting into that 200-point bracket. 11 goals and 7 assists, so less goal involvements overall with 18 than Maddison. But again, more points, more starts, less injuries. Took penalties for a bit as well. And really kind of shone through as that kind of talisman figure for Arsenal in the same way that Maddison did for Leicester. Is expected stats are interesting. An XG of 11.26, that puts him bang on in terms of how many goals he got on 11. Expected assists 6.85, that puts him bang on where his assists were in terms of 7. And expected goal involvement of 18 is exactly what he got overall. So an expected goal involvement per 90 of 0.54. So expected to get something for you every 2 games. Absolutely brilliant value for his price tag, which was, I believe, was 6.5, and just someone who I think is young and is obviously going to kick on and put the disappointment of the Euros to one side to have such a strong season. Looking at his starts in the season before that, I mean, he had 30 starts, 114 points, 5 goals, 3 assists. So again, he's doubled his goals, doubled his assists. As well, and with only 6 more starts, so we're still starting regularly, but has now become that kind of much more involved in the kind of like the final third and those final kind of key balls. An XG of 6.9, so he was actually underperformed on terms of his goals. Expected assists of 4.98, so again underperformed on that. Not too surprising with Arsenal. XGI of 11.88, so really 3 goal involvements less than he should have done the season before. An expected goal of per 90 of 0.42, so it's increased on that as well from 0.42 to 0.54. So what do these stats tell us about Bukayo Saka? Well, firstly, it tells us how good an option he was for us. 0.54 is putting him in fantastic territory when you consider his price. The question mark is, he's going to need to raise that to the next level to be worth that kind of 8 million bracket, I think. I mean, if he got you 180 points for 8 million, you would take that, absolutely. But with an XGI per 90 of 0.54, he might not be, so likely to get to that level. 0.6 is really the kind of, the next level of approaching that kind of 200 points, generally speaking, from the stats. Obviously, players can overperform, and Saka's gone from someone who's underperformed to now being about where you'd expect him to be. Can he take that next step up to massively overperform on these underlying numbers? Be great to see for England, for Arsenal, for our teams. And kind of for everything. We saw last season him taking more responsibility. We saw him taking the penalties. As I mentioned, it's going to know whether he takes those continuing or whether Martinelli's going to come in or whether Gabriel Jesus is going to take over those. Obviously, having penalties massively boosts his appeal in that sense. The great thing about Saka, though, is you've got all these midfielder options. You might be tempted by Odegaard, you might be tempted by Martinelli at their price, even someone like Smith Rowe. Lots of people flocking to Jesus now at 8 million. I think he's over 50% ownership. I think it's going to drive Saka's ownership down. We haven't seen Jesus play for Arsenal yet. We know he is someone that doesn't always, make the most of his chances. Is that going to change? Saka is going to be a reliably consistent player, I think, next season. He carries on getting about where he should be, which I think he will, and whether he can kick on to that next level kind of remains to be seen. But 8 million, I think he's a good option. I think he's nicely settled in that side. Jesus is maybe a little bit more exciting option, but I think Saka is more reliable and will do well for a lot of people that choose to go there right at the start. Looking at the next player, we've got Mason Mount, also 8 million. Again, these another talismanic figure for his side. We kind of thought that was going to be Lukaku last season, but it's not. Mason Mount again made another step up, I think, to becoming such an important figure for that in that Chelsea side. The system that Chelsea play with the wing backs with James and Chilwell, also so important. The injuries to them really kind of derailed their season. Rudiger was so important as well, but now he's gone. Lukaku's gone off as well. We might see Sterling coming in. We might see some other players kind of step up. But I think, again, we're going to see another big season from Mason Mount. 27 starts for him, so did have a bit of an injury sort of record throughout the season. Missed 11 games for them. I'm sure he would have played almost every game if he had been fit for those. 169 FPL points, which is his biggest return. 11 goals and 10 assists is a brilliant return. We all remember all the goals he scored against Norwich, for example, taking off the likes of Havertz. And what we saw him do was outperform on his XG numbers. So 8.8 expected goals and 11 goals in total, 6.85 expected assists, and he got 10 in total. That gives him an XGI of 15.65. So around 16 goal involvement, something like that, when actually he got 21. But his XGI per 90 is really strong, because obviously he had these less starts than some of the other players that we've mentioned on this list. So an XGI per 90 of 0.59. This is what I mean, when you start approaching that 0.6 territory, this is when your underlying stats mean that you're in for a super season, or what it looks like. So if you can carry on those expected numbers, if Chelsea can get their act together, sort out their system with Rudiger leaving, get those wing backs fit, get Sterling in, gets a focal point up front that maybe isn't Havertz, or maybe it is Havertz. Maybe he will also make that step up, now classified as a striker. But I think this could be another big season for Mason Mount, especially given how we did last season. The season before, for example, 32 starts, so more starts, 147 points, so less points, only managed 6 goals and 5 assists. So again, similar to Saka, managed to kind of double both the attacking returns that he managed. An XG of 6.3, an expected assist of 6.8. So again, didn't massively overperform on those. They were kind of about where you'd expect them to be. An XGI of 13.21. So again, underperformed a little bit, but kind of about where his underlying numbers suggest. And then XGI per 90 of 0.41, which is kind of in the lower end. So from that to increase from 0.4 to 0.59. And again, it was a bit of a turbulent season for Chelsea, with all the stuff that happened with Lukaku, with the ownership crisis, with the injuries to James and Chilwell. You've got to think, hopefully next season we'll see a more settled Chelsea, playing the way Tuchel wants them to play, and Mount's going to be a big figure in that. I will also say at this point, great fixtures for Chelsea. We'll be talking a bit more when I compare these different options later, but I really like the look of those opening games for Chelsea, and I'm really not seeing Mount in many sides. I think of all the kind of 8 million options that I'm talking about, he seems to be one of the less favoured ones, and I think it's because people are targeting those wing backs. But I think Mount could be someone that flies under the radar a little bit, and actually in terms of the Chelsea side, he might be the one that ends up being one of the best players to get in terms of value. So yeah, we'll kind of see how that pans out, but I really like the look of Mason Mount. Again, it'd be really interesting to see kind of whether he does step up again next season, and can he get close to that kind of 200 point mark for Chelsea, because again, for 8 million that would be fantastic. Going to switch things up a little bit now. I'm going to look at 2 sets of players together. The first one is the Man City boys, the Man City midfielders. We have Mahrez and Phil Foden. I've talked about Maddison as being a player that I always like and always admire. I feel exactly the same way about Mahrez from a Premier League perspective. He's one of my favourite players to watch. I think he's got one of the best touches I've ever seen in football, similar to like Messi levels. He can be a bit frustrating, I imagine, for City fans. But you can't really deny that when he's on the pitch that he does deliver. But of course, that key thing is when he's on the pitch. Only 15 starts for him last season. And, I'm already seeing people talking about, the fact that Sterling's leaving, that Jesus is leaving. Might this be Mahrez's kind of chance? I just don't know how he sits in Pep's plans. I mean, Pep was preferring him in the Champions League, not playing him in the Premier League at all. They then get knocked out of the Champions League, and he's not even playing in the Premier League either. It's almost like he doesn't trust him in the Premier League, which is strange when you think he's won the title with Leicester and all the other stuff. But I'm just not convinced that Pep really sees him as that kind of best option on the right. I think it could actually be quite likely that he competes with the other player I'm going to be talking about on this screen, which is Phil Foden. Because what happens with Foden, he was playing in that false 9 position last season, 24 starts for him, had a bit of a disappointing season, I think, given his potential, and I really thought this was going to be the breakout season for Foden, but didn't really do it, either from an FPL perspective or from a Premier League perspective, I don't think. Had some great games, but I think under-delivered on kind of his promise. As well, I think Foden now with Haaland coming is going to have to find a new position. Is he going to play on the left? Is he going to play on the right? Is he going to play as part of a midfield 3? I think the midfield 3 is probably the most unlikely, given that De Bruyne's there. You've got Gundogan still there, Bernardo Silva, all these kind of creative players around. On the left, he's going to be competing with Grealish, £100 million signing. I think with Sterling leaving, I think that is a little bit of Pep saying, as a bit of a challenge to Grealish to kind of say, look, we need to, get the most out of you next year. So are we going to see those two players competing on the left? I think it's probably more likely that Foden moves over to the right and we see him competing with Mahrez over for that right-hand spot. Foden has publicly said that he wants to play on the right. I think that is his kind of preferred position. So it'd be really interesting to see kind of how these two do if that is the case. If that does happen as well, again, I think that massively boosts the appeal of Grealish on the left at just 7 million. At the moment, though, I probably wouldn't be tempted by that. I don't know if Grealish has the full trust of Pep, but you don't spend £100 million on a player and then not play them and give up on them. We've seen players initially struggle maybe at City. Someone like John Stones, we've seen how big an impact a player like that can have. I think Grealish has had his first season. He's going to be looking to really bed in next year. So he's definitely one to monitor. Let's just talk about these two players. Let's go back to these. So Mahrez, 135 points in his 15 starts, which is an amazing record. 11.6 sort of minutes per point that he gets is actually one of the best in the league. 11 goals, 5 assists, 16 goal involvements. That's more than a goal involvement every match that he's played in. An XG of 11.9, exactly where it should be, 11.09. Expected assists of 3.81, so just marginally overperformed on that, and an expected XGI overall of pretty much bang on 15, 14.9. So does it do basically exactly what he should be doing, scoring, good chance, getting the chances right, and being about where he should be. An XGI per 90 of 0.86 is huge, absolutely huge, and it's why Mahrez is such a frustrating FPL player, because if you've got a run of games in the team. At 8 million, he'd be in your side. You'd lock him in. He'd be a captain option. You're getting a premium FPL player, for peanuts, really. But you're just never going to be sure, unless there's an injury to one of these players competing with you, you're never going to be sure that he's going to get those starts. Gabriel Jesus moving over to the right last season. Who would have seen that coming? I definitely didn't, and that affected Mahrez, quite a lot. So it could be that Jesus leaving does boost Mahrez's appeal. He's not someone that I'm completely ruling out, even though I've had bad experiences with him in the past, but he's someone that I'm definitely going to be wary of. Just to put his 0.86 into context, Salah's XGI per 90, this is including penalties, is 1, bang on 1. So, he's basically expected to get something every game for you. Mahrez is big, just below that. He has taken the odd penalty, but it's not really something that we've seen him regularly take for them. So I think he's definitely someone to pay attention to, but maybe not start the season with unless we get some evidence that he's going to start. Looking at Foden in comparison, I mentioned his kind of slightly below average season. 24 starts for him. I was hoping to see him get around 30. 137 points, which I think is really, really poor. For the false 9 kind of striker of City, I was expecting more from him. 15.7 points per minute, which is kind of okay-ish, but again, compared to Mahrez, leaves a lot to be desired. 9 goals, just under his XG of 10. 5 assists, bang on his expected assists of 5, and XGI of 15.35. So just underperformed a little bit on his kind of underlying numbers. An XGI per 90 of 0.64, though, is high. It does suggest that these kind of numbers indicate that he could be pushing for big sort of returns next season. But again, the goals and assists just weren't really there. We need to see him overperforming on some of these metrics to really kind of get into that elite bracket. I mean, if he'd started 38 games, for example, and kept up these kind of XGI numbers, we might have seen him get close to the 200-point mark, which is definitely a good place to be. But the worry is only 24 starts. He did miss some quite sort of gilt-edged opportunities for City. I think Pep got frustrated with that in the end, was trying different things and moving him around a bit. And now he hasn't got that kind of striker position locked. We don't really know what that's going to do to his XGI numbers next season. My sense, hopefully, is that not playing in that false 9 frees him up a little bit. If he does end up on the wing, I think we might see someone who's tasked a bit more with creativity, not just dropping back and sort of getting other players into the game, but pushing forward a bit more, getting into danger positions, and that. Again, I think both of these players are a wait and see for me. I want to see what Foden's role is in the team before I go there. I want to see if Mahrez can nail down that right-hand slot and just see what happens. I mean, Foden's got that versatility that he can play anywhere across 4 different positions pretty much. So that does help him. I think we're going to see him get hopefully around 30 starts again next season. And if we don't, I think he's going to be questioning sort of what his role is in that City side. He's got too much talent to be playing 20, 25 games. In a season where he had a couple of little injuries, I believe, but nothing too serious. So yeah, we'll see what happens with Foden next year. He's really popular. I'm seeing him in a lot of templates. Don't blame people at all. It's West Ham in the first game and then Bournemouth. But again, if you've got that 8 million slot, you maybe want to start with someone else. Maybe someone going to wait on the next screen, and then maybe thinking about moving over to Foden when he has some easier games. That West Ham game does give us one game at least to assess how Man City line up and what they're going to be about next year. So Foden, promising numbers, didn't really deliver, I think, because of the lower starts that he had, but someone definitely to pay attention to, as is Mahrez. Okay, and the final two players I want to talk about are two players that signed in January for their respective clubs. Both had huge impacts on the seasons of Liverpool and Spurs. We'll start with Luis Diaz. He got 11 starts. For Liverpool, 64 points, so 15.1 points per minute, which is kind of equal to where we were talking about with Foden. 4 goals and 3 assists. His XG was 4.4, so a little bit underperformance, but not huge. And expected is 1.48, so 3 assists means that these chances were converted more than we kind of expect. And an XGI of 5.92 with 7 goals, so just about overperformed on what he's about. Now his XGI per 90 of 0.55 is okay. I mean, for a player who was often used maybe sort of off the bench, against tired legs, and then was playing, in such a talented player playing for such an attacking Liverpool team, I had hoped to see that stat be a bit bigger than it was. I mean, when you think it's almost half of what Salah's is, for example. The thing with Diaz is we don't need to judge him as a 13 million midfielder. We need to judge him as a 8 million midfielder. He had just signed, in January. These are good, promising numbers to indicate that with a bit more responsibility, if he's played a bit more, the more he gels with his new kind of teammates, given that he's got Núñez there now as well, then are we going to see a kind of a different side to him? Are we going to see those numbers, those underlying numbers increase? Can he reach that really clinical level that Mane got to when he was priced at 11, 12 million FPL, but was often giving us the option and making us think maybe we didn't always go there with Salah there because obviously the penalties and things like that. I always thought Mane was a little bit overpriced. If Mane had been a 10.5 option, I think we would have seen a lot more investment in him. Now for Diaz to reach that, he's going to need to have a season where he gets close to 200 points. The numbers here don't tell me that he's going to get to that level. I think we might see him getting around 170 points next season. I think that would be okay for an 8 million asset, and I think that base is actually quite decent because I think there's always the chance that he could go much higher. I think we're going to get a sort of more consistent minutes for him. I think he's going to be tasked with giving a lot to that Liverpool attack, particularly in the early stage as well, as maybe Núñez is eased in a little bit more. What's going to happen with Jota? I think we're going to see Diaz playing a lot kind of on that left-hand side. So the numbers don't scream that he's an essential pick to me, but I do really like him, and I do think, given that they've got Fulham in that first game, I think there's a perfect chance to jump on him, see how he does in that, see kind of what his role is in the side, and kind of go from there. So I really like Luis Diaz, and as we're going to mention a bit later, he features very highly in my kind of preferred option out of these. Kulusevski, I think, is a fascinating one as well. I mean, 14 starts for him, absolutely incredible for Spurs. He signed, I don't think anyone was really expecting the impact that such a young player could have. He was playing like a number 10, I believe, in the team he was at before. And then he's at Juventus and then comes in and is shifted to the right. You wouldn't think necessarily someone as tall as him would kind of do as well. I remember Dan Burn playing for Brighton at left wing back. He was doing quite well there, but you always thought he hasn't got the right physical attributes for this. I thought that about Kulusevski as well, but my God, what an impact he had. I mean, 99 points for him, since January. Absolutely incredible. Less than half a season that he had. 13 points per minute, which is a brilliant return. We considered he was 6 million when he came in. 5 goals and 8 assists. So he overperformed on his XG of 3.62 with his 5 goals. He massively overperformed on his expected assists of 2.65 to 8, and that was mostly because he'd laid the ball for Son, and Son would do something incredible with it. But right place at the right time. And expected goal involvement of 6. He massively did overperform on that. His actual XGI numbers per 90 of 0.44 is one of the lowest of all the players that we've talked about. So I think he was helped out by some really good finishing from other players in the Spurs side. But 5 goals in 14 appearances certainly isn't bad. The trouble with Kulusevski is he's 8 million now. knowing he's competing against some of these other players that we've kind of mentioned. I'm worried about rotation with him. Richarlison's going to come in. I don't know where Richarlison's going to fit into that side, but you've got to think that he's going to get 20, 25 starts in the league for the money they've paid. He's not just going to be there to give Son a rest. He's not just going to be there to give Kane the odd rest. He's going to be really kind of competing. Some rumours that we could see Kulusevski moving to wing-back. Are we going to see that if Jed Spence comes in? Probably not. I just don't know where Kulusevski is, and I don't know how he's going to kick on from last season. I think he's a gamble with the stats that the underlying stats that he's got that indicate this kind of overperformance. With these signings that Spurs have made, okay, they've got a great, first game in Southampton, but I'm just a bit too worried that at that price we're going to see him kind of in and out the side. He's often the first player kind of subbed if things aren't working tactically, or if Spurs are winning comfortably. Lucas Moura can always come on. And now Richarlison can come on as well to kind of give him a break or to change things up or to rest his legs, all that kind of thing. So I'm worried about Kulusevski. I was really, really hot on him until Richarlison signed, and that signing has really kind of tempered my expectations of him next season. So out of the two January signings, I think it's Diaz who has the bigger potential next year in our sides. Not at all saying that Kulusevski can't continue to do it. I think he's an absolutely top player. But he, again, will be a wait and see for me, especially when you've got Son and Kane, just as such good options in that Spurs side, or potentially the wing-backs in Perisic and Spence if he comes in. I think it does just limit the impact I think Kulusevski's going to have early on for us. So let's take a look at these players compared with each other. What I've done here is create a table, just looking at the ones that we've talked about so far. I've filtered by points per game, because of course what we care about is points. Obviously the problem with doing this is it assumes all players are equal, and I've mentioned some of the limitations of the likes of Mahrez and Kulusevski in terms of their minutes. But if things were equal, based on last season, Mahrez had the best points per game of all the players we've mentioned, with 7.8, nearly 8 points a match. Which is pretty incredible, really. An XGI of 0.86 per 90, which is one of the highest in the league as well. Second on the list, interestingly enough, 6.9 points per game is Kulusevski, but he did only have an XGI of 0.44, which is the lowest of all the players on this list, too, only just behind James Maddison in third. What's interesting is the first four players on this list are actually very similar in terms of their points per game. You've got Mahrez way ahead in 7.8, but then you've got the next four, Kulusevski, Maddison, Mount and Diaz, all between 6 and 7 points per game. Mount and Diaz, who actually had the worse points per game, had the better XGI numbers as well. So Mount and Diaz are two that I'm really, really interested in, and I think Kulusevski and Maddison, despite scoring more points, might be two players that I think maybe regress a little bit next season on these outputs, and I can see Mount and Diaz just really kicking on next year. Down the bottom of this list, in terms of points per game, is Foden at 5.7. Again, I think that's really disappointing for him, but XGI per 90 of 0.64 does indicate that the returns could be there if he does get more starts. And again, we need to see what his kind of position is in the side. And right down the bottom, maybe surprisingly for a lot of people, because he was such a good option for us, is Saka at 5.4. Arsenal have made a couple of new signings, particularly in Jesus. We don't expect Saka's role to change much. I think he's going to carry on, playing and being that kind of linchpin in the side as well. I think again, though, if he's going to lose penalties, his XGI of 90 of 0.54 might mean that we do kind of look elsewhere, kind of in this bracket, and maybe look towards Jesus. But again, I think we're going to see Saka flying under the radar, and I'm hoping to see that after such an amazing season for him last season, where he really did kick on, that he kicks on once again next year. So again, I think he's probably not someone that I'm going to be starting with, and he's probably not my pick of the 8 million options. But I do think we're going to see people with him in their size, and I don't blame them at all. Looking at the fixtures, in terms of the attacking kind of numbers, City have the best first 5 fixtures from an attacking perspective, all teams, which you have to take note of when it's someone like Manchester City. They've got Bournemouth and Nottingham Forest in their first 5. They've got West Ham, Newcastle and Palace, 3 good defensive sides, but those 2 promoted sides look really, really good, and no sort of games in which you wouldn't expect them to score. In that, looking at Spurs, they're 9th, for example. They've got Southampton and Forest, which look really good. They've also got a Chelsea game in there as well. Leicester only have 1 game in the first 5 that looks really appealing, which is Southampton in game week 3, and then they go straight into Chelsea and United. They play Wolves and Arsenal in their first 2 as well. These, are sides that we know can defend, which is why I think Maddison is a wait and see for me. Now, the next two players, though, I really like the look of. I mean, Mount, I mentioned, going to massively fly under the radar. Really good expected goal involvement numbers. Good points per game. Everton in the first game really struggled last year. Then Spurs. I mean, I've put Spurs in red. Anything can happen in that match. You know, it's a derby match in London, and they go straight from that into Leeds, Leicester, and Southampton. 3 brilliant games in which you'd expect Chelsea to score lots of goals in as well. So I really wouldn't, overlook Mason Mount, and particularly in these first 5 games. You know, if you're going for, maybe just one of their wing backs, for example, in James or Chilwell, I do think Mount gives you that kind of 8 million spot that you can really, consider. I really like Diaz as well. I mean, the second best fixtures from an attacking point of view for Liverpool. Is there going to be some adjustment with their new players, or are they going to click straight in? Does it really matter? I mean, they've got Fulham in game week 1. Palace, okay, that's quite tough. United, we saw what they did to them last season. And then Bournemouth at home, and then Newcastle at home as well. The fact it's not Newcastle away, the fact it's Newcastle at home, I think is really nice for those first 5. So again, I think Diaz is someone who I'm expecting big things from next season. And then finally got Saka. They've got a tough first game, I think, Crystal Palace away, but then they go into Leicester, Bournemouth, Fulham and Villa. This is a nice sort of 4 fixtures for them, particularly those 2 promoted sides. So again, if you're looking at fixtures, looking at Arsenal, I think we're going to want to tap into that team in some capacity, and I think Saka's a great option. If you don't go for Jesus, or maybe you're not looking at their defenders anymore, maybe you don't have that kind of reassurance with Ramsdale kind of losing a bit of form. We're not sure who's going to be starting at centre back with Saliba coming back in, and will Ben White start? I think Tomiyasu is a great option as well. But if you want to tap into the Arsenal tank, it has to really be Saka or Gabriel Jesus. So again, it'd be interesting to see where people go with that. So in terms of my own rating, just to round off this video, I think the best option out of the 8 million options to start with is Luis Diaz. I think we're looking at teams in which we want to see something in that first game, and I think Liverpool starting with a promoted side, and the fact that I think we're going to have to wait and see a little bit on Núñez. The fact that Diaz hit the ground running so well last season, is only going to be looking to improve on that next year. Fulham have got probably one of the worst games imaginable in that first match. So I think you can easily start with Luis Diaz. If you're not impressed by what you see, you can then maybe move to one of the other players too. But in terms of purely for that game week 1 match, I think there's no better 8 million option than Diaz. Mount, I put Mount in second. I think he's going to be overlooked by a lot of people. Again, I think the fixtures are really, really nice, especially with Everton in that kind of first game. I'm expecting Everton to really, really struggle next season. Okay, Tarkowski coming, who's a good signing, but they've lost Richarlison. They might be losing Gordon as well. Is kind of, I don't know if they're going to make any kind of big key signings. There's rumours that Dennis is going to come in, but I think Lampard's going to have a really tough job there. So it's a great first game for Chelsea as well. And like I said, I really like those kind of games immediately after that, particularly after that Spurs game as well. Third, I've put Saka, just purely because we know he's got the pedigree in the league. I think we can wait for him a little bit. We can wait to see if he does have penalties. My sense is that he probably doesn't, given that Marseille took one in kind of the last week, but he's going to really relish playing with Jesus. They're such hard workers. I think they're going to complement each other kind of really, really well. And also got such a good opening run of fixtures as well. That he's someone that I think we could get on early with and not really look back on. He could be a season keeper for us if you're willing to kind of back the fact that he's going to kick on again from where he did last season. I think all the 8 million options are good though. I like Maddison. I think Maddison's going to be a factor for us maybe later in the season. I'm not expecting a really strong start from Leicester given the fixtures they've got. I think he's someone who I think that just brings him down on some of these other players. If he was 7.5, for example, I think you could take that 0.5 and maybe risk him. But when he's in the kind of bracket of Diaz and Mount and Saka, who we know season after season are probably going to deliver. I mean, less so with Saka, but just keep kicking on season after season. Diaz coming into the lead, taking it by storm. Mount's growing influence kind of in the side as well. So yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting to see kind of what happens with that. Kulusevski's got the issues with the kind of signings that Spurs have made. City have got West Ham away, and then it's tricky to know who's going to start from that thing. So there's just more risk around a lot of the other players, whereas these three I think are bound to have a good season next year, and you can't really go wrong with them. So that's my rating. Let me know if you agree or disagree with these. If you've enjoyed this video, do subscribe to the channel. Give me a like as well. Love to get your comments on the graphics too. So please do drop those in. And I will see you on the next video. Thanks for watching.